Magnus versus Gukesh. If you are a chess fan or if you follow chess, you must have seen a footage where Magnus was slamming the table after losing to Gukesh. It happened in the Norway Chess 2025. And now, today, after a couple of days or weeks later, we have a rematch. This is a tournament. The name is Grand Chess Tour SuperUnited Rapid and Blitz Croatia 2025. We have a rematch. Magnus is playing with white, Gukesh is playing with black. And Magnus should be and he must be looking for a revenge. So in this video, I'm going to completely break down this game in the most easiest manner. And as I always say, if you really want to improve your chess, you must analyze the games of very top players. So make sure to watch the complete game till the end and let's begin. So Magnus with the white pieces opened the game with 1c4. Gukesh with the black pieces replied with e5. And now we have knight to c3. And now we have bishop to b4. Sort of a reverse Sicilian to play with the white pieces. And now bishop to b4. And now we have the move knight to f3. Now many beginners or even club level players would argue, even I would argue, why, there are moves like knight d5, you are just centralizing the knight and also attacking the bishop at the same time. It's a good move. Definitely it's a good move. But here, after a5, you are defending the bishop. And if you first of all try to take off the bishop, black is having the open a file for his rook. And the b4 pawn is very strong, giving maximum space to black on the queen side. So taking the bishop is not a great idea. So for example, if white continues with a3 attacking the bishop goes back, and you see after bishop c5, the bishop is nicely placed on c5, a5 pawn is nicely placed, and now the most important part, now black's idea is to simply play the move c6, attacking the knight, and once the knight goes back, now black can strike in the center with d5 with complete control in the center. That's the most important reason why white is not generally playing knight to d5, because there is some c6 d5 business. So after bishop b4, Magnus decides to play the move knight to f3. Following some basic fundamentals, knight f3, developing the piece and also attacking the pawn. And now, the most natural moves that comes in my mind is to play the move d6, either to protect the pawn or to just play the move knight c6, protecting the pawn with the knight. In the game, we had bishop cross e3. First, starting with d6, which looks very natural. You are just pushing the pawn, the bishop is outside the pawn chain, you are also defending the pawn, and now the bishop is opened up. After d6, the drawback here is, now white can develop his queen to a4, giving a check to the black king, and now the bishop is also hanging. So the only move for black is to develop the knight, protect the bishop, and also cover the check. And now, white can now play the move knight to d5, as there is no c6, and now the knight and the queen is attacking the bishop. So the bishop has to fall back, and now b4, a very strong move in this position, just attacking the bishop. And now you can already start to feel that, okay, black is not happy in this position. And just to show you the complete line, after bishop b6, white can simply chop off the bishop, as you can't take with the a pawn because the rook is hanging. So you have to take with the c pawn, and after b5, the knight is hanging. You have to move the knight, and after bishop a3, you can already realize that, first of all, white is having the bishop pair advantage, more space on the queen side, and also the d6 pawn is very weak at the same time. So that's the main reason d6 is not a good move in this position, and you must remember this. Second move which comes to a mind of a chess player, which is very natural, you are developing the knight. What's wrong with this? Definitely there is nothing wrong with it, but after knight d5, now knight d5 is possible, because you must realize that now the knight is on c6, so c6 move is not really possible. So after bishop c5, e3, white can already strike with d4, having a complete control in the center, and thanks to the knight on c6, there is no c6 available. So that's the reason knight c6 is also not a good move, knight c6 and d6. So that leaves us to only one option, which is bishop cross c3. This is the whole idea why black captures the knight. And now white can capture with the b pawn and the d pawn. Nothing is wrong with any of the pawn captures. Magnus decides to capture with the d pawn. You can also try to capture with the b pawn, but I would say it's a bit double-edged. You are having more space in the center, but at the same time your a pawn is weak. You see, the pawn structure has a bit compromised. Instead, if you take with the d pawn, you see the pawn structure has not been compromised yet. You can play b3, and you are having a nice pawn structure on the queen side, your d file is opened up, the dark square bishop is opened up, and it's good. So we have d6 by Gukesh, just protecting the pawn finally. We have e4 by Magnus, taking control of the complete center. And now we have the move knight to d7. I personally like the move knight to d7. Now many beginners would simply play the move knight f6 and castle up. You can do it, but that's not the most flexible option in the position. You see, obviously if I try to put the knight on c6, it's not a happy piece, because thanks to the pawn on c3, it covers the b4 and the d4 square. So knight is absolutely worst piece on c6. The knight generally belongs to c5. So you can play the move knight to d7, keeping the option open. Maybe you want to play the move knight d7 f5. Who knows? Or maybe just knight f6. And you are also not allowing white to develop the bishop so easily, because now you are having option. You can play f6, you can play knight f6, maybe knight e7. You are having options. So knight d7 is the most flexible move in the position. We have bishop to d3 by Magnus. And once again, it's a very key move to understand why bishop d3 has to be played and must be played. Now, you see, now white is having options. Maybe bishop e2, maybe bishop d3, maybe bishop d2, bishop e3, or who knows, bishop g5. You see, black's idea is to put the knight on c5, which covers the d3 square. And generally, white wants to put the bishop on the c2 square. You see the bishop on c2 and c1. It's a typical idea generally in these types of position. You can maybe castle up, maybe try to launch a kingside attack. So black wants to play the move knight c5 on the next move. So white is playing the move bishop d3, also protecting the pawn, and after knight c5 the bishop goes back on time. Everything is happening on time. If black plays white plays h3, knight c5, after bishop d3, black can happily capture the bishop, and white is no longer having the bishop pair advantage, and black is pretty happy. So that's the reason bishop d3 was played. Knight c5, bishop c2 go back, and now finally we have knight to f6 by Gukesh. Okay, now we have queen e2 because the pawn was double attacked by the two knights. And now we have a5 by Gukesh. It's a very nice move, a very positional move, and a move that is generally played in such types of position. You are grabbing more space on the queen side, not allowing white to play b4 so easily, though it would not be a great idea because it kind of compromises white's pawn structure. White's knight's pawn structure would be to put the pawns like this, or either to put the pawns like this. So we have just a5, just trying to grab some space on the queen side, because Gukesh is not really sure whether he should castle or not. Because if, for example, if black tries to castle up, who knows, white will start a kingside attack, because both the bishops are lined up on the king side. Sorry about that, wrong arrow. So we have a5, a very flexible move by Gukesh. And now we have the move knight to d2 by Magnus. Once again, a very good move. Now, what's wrong with short castle? Why are you just moving the same piece twice? Like, you see after short castling, what's happening? Like, what is wrong with this move? To understand what's wrong with castle, you first need to understand what's the idea of knight d2. After knight d2, if I just ask you a question, what could be the best square for the knight? Many of the good players would simply say that d5 square is the best square for the knight, and that's true. Who knows, maybe f5. Knight f5 would be a very strong piece, or even knight d5. So knight d2 makes no sense because Magnus wants to play knight f1, knight d3, and keep his options open, whether to put his knight on f5 or maybe on d5. And if he just castles up in the position, you see the rook is on f1. So first he need to move the rook, and then he need to do that maneuvering, which kind of wastes time for white. So that's the reason knight d2 is a much better move. And now many of the beginners must be arguing, and you must argue, what's wrong with b4? What's wrong with b4? Like, there is nothing wrong with b4, but after just knight e6, as I said, white's pawn structure is not very well placed. The pawn structure must be like this, or the pawn structure must be like this. So that's the whole idea. Knight d2 was played, which is a good move now. And now we have g6 by Gukesh. And on g6 at the first glance looks a bit odd, a bit suspicious. Like, why Gukesh is playing the move g6? You see, as I said, Magnus wants to play knight f1, knight e3, knight f5. So he's just playing g6 to take away the f5 square, which is a good move. And now many of the beginners must be arguing, like, what's wrong with short castling? Just castle up. The main problem with short castle here is white is going to go with his same idea, with knight f1, knight e3, knight f5. And if you try to play g6 now you're going to see some power of the bishop with bishop h6, h4, and now you can already start to realize, you can already start to feel the heat after f3, g4, h5. White is launching just a one-side attack and black is going to get crushed. That's the whole idea. Castle is a bit not a good move. You're not really sure where the bishop belongs, maybe on d7 or e6. That's the reason Gukesh is not currently committing the bishop. So g6 is a fine move in practical perspective. And now we have knight to f1 by Magnus, just going with his usual idea. And now we have bishop to e6 by Gukesh, just developing the bishop. Nothing wrong with this move, but a better move I believe would have been b6. Just pushing the pawn, a nice pawn structure. Maybe you can play bishop b7, putting some pressure. Looking forward some breaks in the center with c6, g5, who knows. But okay, bishop e6, nothing wrong with this move. Bishop to g5 by Magnus, a fine move, just developing the bishop, putting some pressure on this diagonal. And now we have h6, bishop h4, g5 by Gukesh. This was his idea all along the moment he played the move g6, because he realizes the dark squares are weak. And now bishop g3. And now you see, if black would have castled up, the black king would have been terribly weak. But now the king is in the center, so black is pretty happy. We have queen d7 by Gukesh, keeping his option open. Maybe he want to do a long castle. Maybe he want to do a short castle. Just centralizing, just moving the queen, that's it. A good move. And now we have f3 by Magnus. He wants to play the move knight e3, maybe knight d5 or knight f5. But the moment he plays knight e3, the e4 pawn is hanging. That's the whole idea. So he first played the move f3, just protecting the pawn, and now his idea is knight e3, knight d5, or maybe knight f5. Gukesh played the move knight h5, understanding the position that the knight on f6 was not really doing much, so it's better to put the knight on f4, which is a good square for the knight. And now we have knight e3, and now we have the move knight f4. Now many of the players would simply go for capturing the bishop. Definitely you have kind of took away white's bishop pair advantage, but you need to understand the white's bishop is a bad bishop now, because black is having his pawns on the dark squares, which makes the light square bishop kind of limited. So at the place of capturing the bishop, just put the knight on f4, that's it. That's a good square for the knight. And after knight f4, white played the move just queen d2. And now the reason here is, if you try to capture the knight after gf4, now black's g file is opened up, more space on the king side thanks to the pawn on f4, and black is already seriously better in the position. So that's the reason Magnus just moved the king, just moved the queen. And now we have b5 by Gukesh, which is a move which I personally liked a bit too much. He understands what's happening in the position. Both the knights are well placed, the bishop is well placed, he's having more space on the king side. And now, like, he's not really sure where the king belongs. Maybe on king side, maybe on queen side, maybe in the center. He decides to play b5. He understands what's happening in the position. In the game, we had knight to d5. First, the most natural move, which is c cross b5. Now, Gukesh can simply chop off the pawn with the queen. And you see now, it's so much easier to play with the black pieces. The queen is nicely placed now. Knight d3 is a big threat that is coming up. The b2 pawn is weak. Maybe he can play a4. Maybe he can put the rook on the b file. And you see, black is having so much space in this position. White is playing with so much limited space. It's already a bit too hard to play with white. And black side is simply to capture the pawn on c4. You can't really defend it. After b3, I can just take it. White would be just having the double pawns, which is not a great idea. So already b5 is a move which I love too much. And now we have knight to d5 by Magnus. Bishop to d5. If you try to capture the pawn, there is simply knight f6 check and you lose the queen. So Gukesh decided to capture the knight with the bishop. We have c cross d5. But obviously, because if you try to capture with the pawn, e-pawn, you are losing the c-pawn. So c d5, and now we have the move knight to h5 by Gukesh, which is a move which I found a bit suspicious already. The knight on f4 is doing a good job. There is nothing wrong with it. And if ever white tries to capture the knight, you can simply capture it with the g-pawn, having the open g file. So in this position, a good move would have been to play the move king e7. King is very safe. Why? Because the center is blocked, and thanks to the g-pawn, f4 is kind of impossible to achieve for white. And now black is having options. Maybe he can break with b4 on the queen side, getting his another rook. or maybe just a rook, or maybe who knows, he can get some play on the king side. The king side is happily positioned now for black. Instead we have knight h5, and now we have bishop to f2 by Magnus. Okay, so Gukesh understands that he wants to capture the bishop. Why? Because now white's preparing to pull back the bishop because the dark squares are extremely weak. But Magnus is definitely going to play the move bishop f2, and now we have the move king to f8. Once again, not a good approach. King f8, king g7. I'm not really sure the king belongs to g7. The king is much betterly placed on e7 because the center is closed once again. But instead we have king f8, which is already a bit doubtful by Gukesh. And now we have g3 by Magnus. A very good move. He understands the position that Gukesh wants to put the king on g7. So he's simply trying to open up the king side with f4 now. King g7, bishop e3 once again, planning to play f4. Queen e7, rook g1, trying to put the rook on the same file as the king, also preparing f4 at the same time. We have knight to f6 by Gukesh. And now we have b4 by Magnus. So first of all, the idea of knight f6 is pretty clear. If you try to play b4, if you try to open up the position with f4, the e4 pawn is hanging. Okay, so Magnus decides to play the move b4. So Magnus is like, okay, I'm having complete play on the king side. So let's do one thing. Black would love to generate some heavy play on the queen side. So let me first play the move b4, trying to lock down on the queen side. And once I lock down on the queen side, I'll just completely strike in the center with f4 with completely winning position. Instead, like, I believe h4 would have been a much better move. You ask me why? Because after h4, first of all, black can't really take because of white is completely winning. White wants to simply capture the pawn on g5. So the only move for white is for black is to push the pawn. And after g4, I believe just rook f1. You ask me why rook f1? Because obviously now the file is closed up because black is never going to take on h4. So just rook f1, and now white wants to take and open up the f file. And after maybe just b4, black trying to open up the things on the queen side, just queen e2 with the threat of taking the pawn. If h5, there is simply bishop to g5 with a nice square for the bishop and putting maximum pressure on the black. And if not h5, if black takes, just queen f3. And you see, now there is g4, g5 coming up, and already, like, it's impossible for black to continue the possession after bc3, bc3. Though engine says that white is having a roughly +1 advantage, I believe practically it's too hard for black to continue the possession. Just g4, g5 coming up, who knows, just king d2. I can put the rook to g1, f1 and play g4, g5. It's game over. It's already very hard to play with black, and if it's a rapid game. Instead, Magnus played b4. And after takes, Gukesh played the move knight to a4. And now we have the move bishop to d3. And after bishop d3, like, Gukesh saw a brilliant idea, which is kind of insane, and this is the reason he's the world champion. We can argue actually that he is a world champion because he found the move, like, currently the bishop is attacking the pawn. So he decides to play the move c6, which is such a class move in the position. You ask me what's so special about this move. After c6, like, you need to first understand the position. Magnus is looking for a kingside attack. He played c6, sacrificing the pawn, and now playing the move d5, opening up the center because he understands Magnus' king is in the center. d5, and now we have the move e cross d5. First of all, if the bishop tries to snatch the pawn on b5, there is simply d4 attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back, and a very strong move now, which is g4. You can't really push or take because of knight to e4, and white would be simply collapsing then. At the same time, the knight is jumping to c3. And believe me, like, despite 2 pawns advantage, black is having such a good positional play, it's nearly game over. That's it. So that's the reason bishop b5 was not played in the game, and we have ed5 instead. Knight d5, and now we have a3 by Magnus because just protecting the pawn on b4. That's it. And now many of the beginners would say, okay, why not just protecting the bishop, because a b4 pawn is hanging for now. And now we have the move rook to d8. Okay, we have the move rook to d8. And now many beginners would argue, like, let's take the bishop on e3, yeah, because now white is no longer having the bishop pair. Yeah, that's true, but You see currently the bishop pair is not really doing much. It is not really doing much. You need to understand this position. We have rook to d8 just getting all the pieces into the game. It's better to get all the pieces into the game rather than just trading off pieces and making play easier for white. Just rook d8. You first can't really take over here because after knight c3, the bishop is hanging, the queen is hanging. You can't really defend the bishop and that's it. So Magnus decides to play the move rook c1, just protecting the pawn on c6. And now we have the move rook to d6 by Gukesh. His idea is to get all the pieces in the center. Engine says that it's white slightly better, but believe me, practically you can already understand how it's difficult for white to continue the position. The d file is open for the rook. Maybe there are going to be some central breaks. The king is in the center, and that's it. Magnus finally plays the move bishop to b5, capturing a pawn. And what's his idea after knight d to c3? His idea was to play the move bishop to c5. Now, for a beginner, it looks a bit complicated position, but just let me break it down for you. In the game, we had knight cross b5. Currently, the bishop is kind of pinning up the rook and the queen. If the knight goes for capturing the bishop, after queen cross c3, the knight is hanging, so the knight have to move. And now you can just understand this position. The pieces have been a bit minimized now, and now the c6 pawn is a very strong pawn, and white is better for sure. So instead, we have the move knight cross b5, and now simply bishop cross d6, capturing the rook. Takes. And now what's happening? What is happening now? So basically, white is having a rook and two pawn for the two knights. That's exactly what's happening. But the white's king is in the center, and the a3 pawn is also weak. We have the move king f2. Magnus is trying to run away with his king, trying to get his g rook into the game, which is a good idea. And now we have the move knight to b6 by Gukesh. Going back with the knight, maybe knight c4 could be an idea, and also attacking the pawn on a3. Magnus played the move queen to d3, just protecting the pawn. And now we have the move queen to e6 by Gukesh. So first of all, if black tries to play the move e4 in the position, there is queen to d4 check, and black loses the knight. So that's the reason Gukesh first played the move just queen c4, just trying to improve the queen. Maybe knight c4 can be an idea. And Magnus played the move rook to c5, which was a blunder. I believe Magnus wants to play move like rook f5, maybe rook e1, putting pressure. Maybe just rook a1, trying to get the rook onto the queen side. But it was a blunder. Instead, he should have played the move rook g e1, just trying to stop e4 and now threatening rook to c5. After rook c5, the main mistake here is that black can play the move e4, and that's exactly what happened in the game. Because after queen d4 check, thanks to the rook on c5, the knight is no longer hanging. And after e4, it's already like black is better and already very hard to play with white. We have a check, the king goes back, and now we have rook d1. Of course, you can't take because of after knight takes, white loses the rook. Rook d1 attacking the knight, and simply e cross f3. You can't take the knight because it's just a two move mate, game is over. So going back, you can't take the knight, and now we have the move rook to e5. So now I'm going to discuss some couple of moves. Like for example, if white takes the pawn on f3 after rook cross a3, all the pieces are getting into the game. It's already game over for white. And if just rook c2, which would have been the best move in the position. Why? After knight e4 check, king f3, rook a3, rook d3. Now you can see definitely black pieces are much nicely placed, that's for sure. But with the help of the rooks, the attack has been a bit minimized. Definitely white's king is in the pressure, but still it would have been the best. Instead, we have the move rook to e5. And now there is the only single move in the position. You can try to pause the video and try to think. It's black to play only one move wins. Queen to h3, which is amazing. Now, Gukesh is threatening queen g2, queen h2. Both the moves are very strong. If white tries to snatch off the knight, queen check, another check. First of all, if the king goes back, you can just check with the f pawn, make second queen, and that's it. So that's the reason we have, like, if king e3 check, and black can simply snatch off the rook, and that's game over. That's the reason you can't really take the knight. We have king cross f3 finally, because both the moves are very strong, so you have to take the pawn. And now we have the move knight to c4. Black can also go for capturing the pawn on a3 with the rook, which is also fine. But we have knight to c4, getting the knight in the game, and now also threatening to capture the pawn with a check. The rook is hanging. So Magnus was kind of forced to give up the rook now. Give an exchange sacrifice, and now we have a check. King goes back, check, king g1. If white plays rook check, while black can simply snatch off the pawn. Black is a piece up, and that's it. So king g1, knight to f5 attacking the queen. The queen moves, knight to e3 attacking the rook. Rook to d2, queen check, king f2, check, and now we have king e2. The king can't go forward because of knight check, and white loses the queen. So we have the move king to e2. In this position, if white tries to capture the knight, just queen d2, and once again black is winning. So we have king e2, knight goes to e5, and finally after knight e5, the queen and the pawn is also losing. So finally black captured the pawn and captured the pawn on e5, which is a very good move, simply threatening rook e5, and the game is over. If it's a check, the king can simply go on g7, which is the only move. King h7 would be a blunder because of queen f7, and then white is winning the game. So just king g7, and now there are no more checks available. Rook to e5 is coming up, and the game is over. So that's the reason after rook to a5 by Gukesh, Magnus Carlsen decides to resign the game. It's 2-0 Gukesh in the last 2 games he played against Magnus, which is insane. I believe, like after the game, Magnus had an interview, and the questions were asked to him. How was he feeling? He said in the interview that he was not really feeling good about playing this tournament. He's not having a good feeling. He's not in the flow. He's not having a mindset of playing such good chess. But despite that, Gukesh played a very good game. After the analysis, you can already understand Gukesh's play was on class. He found moves like b5, c6. C6 is a move which I simply impressed of. Definitely the engine said white is better, but it's hard to play with white, as I said, because black pieces are nicely positioned. So that was the game. I hope that you guys must have enjoyed the analysis, and you guys must learned something. If you did, and if you improved your chess, make sure to like, share, and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to see you soon in the next video. Thank you for watching. See you soon, and bye bye.